Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me as well to this very distinguished panel, and Mark for facilitating this, adaptively facilitating this panel. Moving west in the Amazon, my talk is based on research done in Peru, although to provide some context, I do work in Brazil as well, which inspires this work to some extent. And in this talk, I'm going to describe a case study of smallholder timber production that is feeding the urbanization process, which Christine spoke a little bit about earlier. It's feeding the sort of boom in the housing in Pucallpa, that not so lovely city of Pucallpa. And just for folks who are very hungry and might not make it to the end of the talk, I will be making a case for the deregulation of timber produced in agricultural fallows, so we're working in agricultural systems, suggesting that timber from these areas could in fact be considered as another agricultural crop or another crop in an agricultural system. Now I would just like to acknowledge Miguel Pinedo Vasquez, who is my co-author and colleague who is participating in this project, well in fact leading this project. When I sent in my abstract, I thought he would be here, and unfortunately he's not. So we've kind of combined talks. Whoops. Okay. And I should also just preface this. I did this work while I was at Columbia University. I'm no longer there, but this is all past stuff, and I apologize for the advertisement for my current institution on my computer. So just a quick outline. I'll go through the problem that we're addressing and the objectives of our project. Look a little bit at the income opportunities provided by this production system to produce tablillas, which are small pieces of lumber. I'll very briefly discuss the fallow management system and introduce the stars of the show, the species in the fallow systems, and go through our project activities and briefly make recommendations, or go over our recommendations that we made. I should also say that this is not just a research project, but it's also, we're trying to take action. Somebody yesterday said that we need to start taking action. So this is our contribution to the helping improve livelihoods of smallholder farmers. So the problem, in fact, I should say this isn't the problem with fallow forestry, but the problem for fallow forestry is that there was a new forestry law put in place in Peru in 2001, and which incorporates its sort of broad concepts of sustainable forest development, sustainable forest management. In fact, it makes provisions for the participation of smallholders, indigenous communities in their forest management practices, and the participation of private landholders in the forestry sector. But this new law and its accompanying regulations the regulations are so massive that they really put on an undue burden on the smallholders to actually participate legally and to follow the regulatory framework. And speaking with the forest authorities in Pucallpa, I was trying to understand the regulatory framework and the regulations, and he said, "Oh, well, you're going to need a second PhD in tramitología. Tramites are the forms that you fill out to get your permit to harvest, to transport, and that sort of." And so those guys are talking about tramitología because nobody can really keep it straight, except for actually some of the bloggers. They've got to keep it straight because they need to know how to get around the system. Which is also, it's a whole other wonderful system that is another paper. Okay, so secondly, so then it's very difficult to negotiate the regulatory system. Secondly, and as we all know, tenure to the resource and to the landholding is very important, and securing their rights to their property and identifying those rights to their properties is very difficult. And a lot of people where we work, not a lot, but a considerable number don't have formal tenure to their, or formal rights to their property and the resources. Some do. Thirdly, access to cash and capital to actually harvest and transport and process the timber is hard to come by for largely subsistence farmers who participate sometimes regularly, sometimes opportunistically in the market. And fourthly, technical challenges occasionally get in the way of their participation in the industry. Oh, apologies. So there are all these problems and challenges to smallholder farmer participation, but also there is sort of this window of opportunity at the moment to somehow my watch has stopped. Yeah, it's good. Okay, never mind. So it's bizarre. So anyway, so there's this opportunity because kind of largely new approaches and concepts to forestry, such as sustainable forest management, are integrated into in legal systems in Latin American countries, such as the 2001 forestry law, new forestry law. Secondly, governments are participating in development programs for poverty alleviation, offering new opportunities for engagement in markets. Not the alternative development project that Liliana mentioned yesterday, but there are some other good ideas out there. And then thirdly, decentralization of the federal government to more local authorities provides an opportunity for locally defined development strategies rather than top-down, you're going to do this. If we can, and what we're trying to do, in fact, is influence those locally defined strategies for development in the Peruvian Amazon. The entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well in villages. People are very opportunistic and try to participate where they can, legally, formally and informally. And in fact, most importantly, which kind of gives us some faith, is that there's some precedent for the, well, really the deregulation or alternative regulations for smallholder participation in the timber market in Brazil. And this is some years ago. This is through collective action and policy reform. Municipalities adopted regulations to control timber activities in their municipalities, and that action was taken together with a rural workers union, together with Embrapa, the agricultural authority in the area. And then that led to the state of Amapá actually adopting a program for the family forestry management plan initiative, so kind of to give a framework for smallholder farmers and in fact families to engage in the sector easily. So the larger objective of our project, which we started about in 2004, was really to look at that new framework for forestry, the new law, and at the national level, and bring it down and translate it, really translate it to understand what it means for what the implications are for the local farmers, but also even more importantly we understand fairly well the production systems of farmers, and so we were also trying to translate the realities on the ground to the timber authorities, the local timber authorities and national timber authorities, really in an effort to legitimize their systems, because their system of production isn't recognized as forestry by the authorities. And so that was one of our objectives. The other is to in fact figure out how to legalize what these guys are actually doing in a sort of extra legal way, and finally to stimulate more timber production in these systems. So great. Here's this map again. So we're working in Peru, and our data come from Contamana down here, and the timber is moved up to Pucallpa by river, and then overland to Lima from Pucallpa. So, kind of to set the scene or to give you an idea of the timber activities in the region, we looked at data from this is a checkpoint along the road between Pucallpa and Lima for timber trucks, and this is the daily average volume of timber of various species moving along that road. And you'll notice that these two species are the fallow, the species that are produced in most quantity in agricultural fallows, Bolina and Capirona. And you'll notice that they figure prominently in this in the movement of timber between Pucallpa and Lima. And they come, these Bolina particularly, is transformed into something called the Tablilla, which is a small board, Capirona too. So, and then we went and looked at, because there's the state is emphasizing so much the concession forestry system in the new law, and in fact in their actions, and in the regulatory framework, we looked at those data to see which species are being focused on by concessionaires. And so this is data from 5 different concession permits. And you'll see Capirona here, but Bolina is absent. So since there's so much Bolina moving along the road, I wondered, well, where in the world is the Bolina coming from? If it's not coming from, well, if the concessionaires are saying that it's not coming from their concessions, just to remind, there's the Bolina moving along the road. Well, the Bolina is present in fallows, along with Capirona. In this particular fallow, in a very low density, but in other fallows, both of these species can obtain very high dominance in the fallow systems. In fact, they become monodominant stands. So it's just to say that A, those species are present in fallows, and B, that they can be a major product from these fallows. So to conclude on with this stuff, I looked at the species listed on transport permits. So you have to get a permit A to kind of harvest the stuff, and then you have to get a permit to transport the timber along the waterways or the roads. And lo and behold, Bolina and Capirona are there, still figured quite prominently, but very few on these transport permits. Very little of the timber comes from concessions, which is this yellow part of the graph. It turns out that there are other kinds of permits that are given. As I mentioned earlier, private landholders are supported in this new law. So, and there are 2 here. The permisos are for private landholders to harvest timber and transport timber. And authorizations are for harvest of timber from sort of less formal temporary areas of the forest. And concessions are from formal concession areas. So this is just to say that these 2 species are coming from private, well, people are saying that they're coming from private land holdings and sort of more informal areas. Yeah. So just very briefly to kind of bring it to the ground and let you know about the production system, it's a fairly typical shifting agricultural system, although they do a lot of management in the fallow stage. So you make a field from the forest, and in this case they leave seed trees of Capirona, which then occurs as, this is all natural regeneration in the fallow. So she's protecting and weeding her natural regeneration and doing some management activities, and then you've got this wonderful timber-rich fallow mixed with fruits and medicines and wildlife and other sorts of things. So it's this wonderful integrated system of, and kind of a cyclic system from forest to field to fallow and back again, around and around. Now, some systems some of the farmers really focus on the timber aspects. Other farmers focus on, have a much more integrated system with more emphasis on fruits, or more emphasis, in fact, on longer cycle timber species. But some guys really just focus on the Bolina or the Capirona in their systems. So again, just to remind, these are the 2 species that are very the species that occur in fallows that are occurring in very large quantities in the market today. People also plant and manage higher value species such as tropical cedar and mahogany and a bunch of others, but these 2 are promoted, managed in a higher density. And just to remind, it's a very short production cycle, and that's sort of one of our arguments for this being an agricultural crop rather than rather than a timber crop, because it moves through the system very quickly. So again, the tablilla, which is this board that's used. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture, but it's used. These are the boards, and they're used for house construction. And as Christine said, the urban area is growing very, very rapidly, and there's an extremely high demand for these boards for constructing houses, not only in Pucallpa, but also in Lima. We learned that some development projects are actually, or NGOs are actually purchasing tablillas to make house for the homeless on the edge of the cities or housing up in the highlands. So so there's this great demand and a growing demand, in fact, for the tablillas. These are mostly, a lot of them are processed in the villages. In fact, sometimes in the fallows themselves with a portable mill. But the kind of riverside mill with a single saw blade can produce about 1,200 tablillas per day, which takes up about 50 trees. And then one truckload to Lima takes 14,000 tablillas, which translates to about 3 hectares of kind of a high density bolina fallow, which is kind of handy because the average size of the fallows in the land holdings in Contamana, where we were doing this work, is about 3 hectares. So just to give you a sense that, in 4 years or 5 years, a farmer can produce a whole truckload of tablillas, and which provides this wonderful opportunity for smallholders for income. Now, these guys, they already are participating in this, even though for the most part, the smallholder guys are not doing this legally. They don't take the effort. They don't take the, they often can't get the permits to harvest the stuff and transport the timber legally. So this runs a very high risk, and more often than not, their wood is decommissioned, and they get into a dreadful cycle of debt, which spirals down and down as their wood is decommissioned again and again. So it's this highly risky endeavor, which has potentially wonderful returns. And this is what is sort of stimulating us to find a fairly simple way, a fairly easy way to kind of deregulate this stuff so that people can gain some income where they already are, but in a much safer way. So, and just to give you an idea of the possibilities for income with bolina in this case, is the case I'm using. People will sell sometimes a logger will come and say, hey, I'd like all your bolina. So they say, okay, here's my 3 hectares, take the bolina, and the logger does all of the work. In another case, the loggers will come and say, okay, I love your trees, and so they'll pay a certain amount of money for the trees. In a third way of selling this stuff, they actually, the farmers will fell the trees and cut them up into tucos or logs like that, and then sell those to the loggers, or bring those to the river's edge and sell those to the miller. And finally, some farmers will actually have the mobile mill and produce their own tablillas. And as you can see, in the case of the area, they make a very small profit. Very small profit compared to selling the trees. You triple or quadruple the profit on just any hectare of land. Compared to selling the tucos, of course, you invest a little bit of money, but you get a higher return. And finally, if you have the capital to rent or buy a mill, you can make a considerable amount of money out of a hectare of fallow. So Miguel and I took this information, and we sort of moved forward on the implementation phase of this. And so we were studying the forests, and then going along in the translation process, really trying to teach the authorities, not the farmers, but teach the authorities about the system, and get them on board. And we do sort of sound like evangelists sometimes. I'm going to just buzz through. This is the survey portion. Well, here, This is Miguel, so he's present. He was talking to natural resource authorities and mayors, in fact, of local municipalities to educate them about the farmer systems, because these guys, as Dan mentioned this morning, that the forestry authorities, they enjoy their air-conditioned offices in the not-so-lovely city of Pucallpa, so they rarely get out to see these systems. And I found a lot of resistance with the local foresters, the forest engineers, resistance to the idea that our farmers are really doing forestry and producing quality timber. So we do broadcast activities to in fact talk to the farmers and not teach them how to manage their fellows, but rather teach them about, sort of inspire them to participate in this collective action to open their doors for participating legally in the process. So this is a result of our survey process. We did map lands, and I put a disclaimer down here because I was afraid that people would take this and present it to their local agricultural office and say, look, I don't need to pay my 100 soles for you to come survey my land. But I put a thing there. It turns out they're doing it anyway, so whatever. Alas. Just to show different shapes, this is all purma or fallow, and this is forest. And you find different densities, the trees in very different densities in these different land holdings because of different ages and topography, but also management styles and management objectives. We get, some fellows have a lot of 17 timber species with our two guys there. This is a fallow of the future. So this guy's thinking about his grandkids with mahogany and stuff. Okay, coming to the end. The INRENA is the Forest Authority guys, and they have an office there in Contamana. I was discussing with them, they hadn't, in fact, developed the regulations for there is a possibility of getting permits to log in secondary forests. But because of this great emphasis on concessions as the way to go, they just hadn't yet, it was 8 years later or 7 years later, and they hadn't yet developed the regulations. So they're thinking about it. So I thought, okay, I can influence this process, or I can participate in the process. And they said, well, we got to come up with a regulation first. Then we've got to come up with the process by which people would have to follow to get their permits. Then we got to come up with the terms of reference and the management plan and all of this, which involves ocular inspection by a forest engineer. I can see the dollar signs adding up as the farmers are trying to participate in this process. So we went back to them and said, well, how about the regulation for fallow timber is that it's treated as an agricultural product. How about now this raises all sorts of concerns about certification and how do you know where it comes from, what's the origin of the stuff. So how about you establish an office of purmeros or a fallow, really it's a producer, an office for the producers in the municipality, so they can come and sort of register their land and say, listen, I just let my land to fallow and I'm managing my timber, and these are the species I have, and these are the volumes that I intend to extract in 4 years. So they can have something on paper, and when they're going down the road or the river with their tucos or their tablillas, that's all they need. And when I left last spring, they had this, and I'm not sure what they've done with it yet, but when we go back, we'll see. So our recommendations to the farmers is that they do engage in collective action, that they do get together and say, listen, and I should just say that this is very much family forestry, it's not community forestry, but collectively they can hopefully influence the regulatory process. We were working with the farmers and the mayor to establish this office of purmas. But this is really where things get tricky, because the Ministry of Agriculture is really, of course, a great stickler with titles and that sort of thing. So that's something that they need to work on a lot. But then also in anticipation of participation, of legal participation, we encourage more farmers to start or continue to manage their crops, and also think about planting mahogany and that kind of thing. So that's the end of my talk, and I appreciate your attention, and I'm happy to open questions.
We have time for one quick question, maybe two.
Sorry.
Liliana Davalos. How are these two species dispersed?
Wind and water.
That's why.
Yeah, sorry. And they're floodplain species, I should say. I'm sorry.
Emmanuel Craig, also a quick question. You talked about these trees as timber trees. You talked about a cycle, 6 to 8 years. You showed trees that were both poles and timber. You had one photo, the sawing photo, and another one, and the trunk looked about 30 centimeters. What is the cycle for? I mean, if you talk about 6 to 8 years, are you talking about
25.
30 centimeters or
Yeah.
a timber size tree?
Yeah. This was also an issue for the timber authorities. You know, what's the minimum diameter? And the processors, the millers of the tablillas, they'll do anything above 20 centimeters. In fact, they're getting skinnier and skinnier because people are sort of getting more and more desperate for money and selling very small trees. But the millers say, we really don't like to process anything under 20. And within 4 years, Bolaina will achieve a DBH of 20. It takes about 8 years for Capirona to achieve that diameter. But the thing about tablillas, and I guess why tablillas is such a fairly logical product from a fallow system and sort of a short cycle fallow system, is that they're a small board, and so you can get them from smaller trees, obviously. So that kind of characteristic of the tablillas makes it a rational choice for farmers. Thanks.